All right, I hope this is going to work. This is kind of last minute, and I'd like to do it briefly. This is the day before Tish B'Av, the 9th of Av, a day of big fasting. And I was speaking to some of my non-Jewish wonderful friends, and we were discussing ideas like hell. And I realized that, I think our understanding of hell is very different than maybe other people's. And I'm happy to share those thoughts as to what our ideas are about these things, as long as it's not at the price of being offensive to anybody's beliefs, which I certainly respect. So if that's understood, we can go forward. The name of this class this evening is actually called What the Hell? Or Get Sober. Because the most startling fact, I think, from a Jewish perspective, is that hell is actually a wonderful place. Having spent so much time there personally, I've really gotten to know the place. But the point is that the devil, from our perspective, is not even a bad guy at all. And he's certainly not an angel who has fallen out of heaven and he's recruiting hell's angels and they're waiting for this coup d'etat of a revolution against God. Because that would almost infer that God is not the exclusive domain of all, that God has some competitor, so to speak, which is kind of impossible from our perspective. So we're actually taught that the devil, the angel of death, and what we refer to as the Yetzer Hara, or the evil inclination, are really all in one and the same. And as you'll see, these are all good things. So since the focus of the class tonight is really about the devil and hell, in order to wrap this into the holiday, or the infamous holiday of the 9th of Av, which is a time in Jewish history replete with tragedies, the destruction of the first and second temple, many other events that occurred throughout history. And of course, it all began at the time when the Jews rejected God's advice of coming into the land of Israel. They were smarter than God. And so therefore they sent in great individuals to the land of Israel to spy out the land. They came back with a bad report and everybody cried. And here's the source of something you've probably heard from many parents in your lifetimes, which is cry for nothing. I'll give you something to cry for. And that's what God said to the Jewish people. I'll make this day a day of crying. So first, let's just kind of get the idea of angel of death and the evil inclination behind us. As to the angel of death, there's a medrash that says that when God came to the angels and he said, which angel would like to be the angel of death? So obviously nobody stepped forward as a volunteer. In fact, probably like in the movie, everybody stepped back and maybe left one little angel hanging out there by himself. But they all hesitated, and God said, why doesn't anyone want to be the angel of death? And they said, well, listen, God, who wants to possibly be the angel of death and to bring all of this terror into the world? And God says, well, don't worry about it, because no one will ever blame you. They'll say it was cancer. They'll say it was a car accident. They'll always come up with a reason as to why a person died. You'll never see in the newspaper that 40 people died in Syria today, killed by the angel of death. So on a more mystical note, however, the Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, that there was once actually a particular rabbi whose time to die had come. And the angel of death approached him and he said, look, it's time to surrender to me. And the rabbi said, well, I'll tell you what, I'd like to see my portion in heaven. What is the world to come going to look for me? And if you show me that, then I'll agree. So the angel said, okay, fine. And the two of them go walking off to heaven, kind of like that scene, if you remember, in Monty Python, Meaning of Life, when they're all kind of like walking up to the heaven. And the rabbi notices that, hey, the angel has this wicked blade. And he says to them, look, I don't feel comfortable you carrying that blade. How about I carry that blade and let's walk together? So the angel said, fine, and gave him the sichel. And the two of them are walking along, and they finally come to the wall to heaven. And the rabbi says, I can't see over this wall. Could you give me a little boost? Let me help get up and look over the wall. So the angel says, sure, no problem. So he puts his hands together, and the rabbi steps up on his hands, and whoop, the rabbi jumps into heaven with the angel of death's sichel. And the angel of death is screaming, saying, hey, I need that, that's mine, give it back. And the rabbi is saying, no, that's it, no more death in our world. I'm not giving it back, until God himself comes along and has to ask the rabbi to be kind enough to give this back. And he explains, because There are many times in this world where death is really a relief. There's times in this world where the only way that a person can really become who they can become is not about living forever, because nobody lives forever. It's about living for yourself to be all that you were created to be. And the death factor is really a factor that comes along to sort of create us in a humble way to appreciate time as finite. That nobody is here forever. And those things which we sometimes think are important or maybe not so important, and sometimes those things which we forget about and think they're insignificant are very significant. And so we find that there were individuals who actually elevated themselves so high in space and time that the angel of death became their friend. One classic example was Moses. When Moses was up on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, our sages tell us that one of the experiences he had was he encountered the angel of death. And the angel of death taught him the secret of how to beat death. He told him the mystery of the incense, the ketoret that could be used to stop death. And this was why when the plague was devouring the Jewish nation, Moses told Aaron, take the ketoret and go among the people. And those people who were on the side of the ketoret lived, and the others that were not died. So this was a gift from the angel of death, how to actually overcome death. And further, the Talmud talks numerous stories about King Solomon, maybe the wisest of all men, who was a personal friend with the angel of death. In fact, there's a cute little anecdote, a side story. We're taught that not only does a person have a time in which they die, they even have a place in which they die. And King Solomon once came into his temple and he saw the angel of death sitting there really bummed out. He says, yo, death baby, what's happening? He says, I got a real problem. And King Solomon says, well, what could that problem be? He says, well, there are these two guys and they're supposed to die tomorrow, but I don't know how to get them to the place where they're supposed to die. So King Solomon says, well, yeah, that sounds like a bummer. Sorry, I can't help you. And he quickly sneaks out of the temple and he runs to these two guys. He said, look, I just bumped into the angel of death. I got some bad news, but there's a special city called the city of Luz. And in the city of Luz, like Shangri-La, people never die. So he suggested that they quickly run to the city of Luz and get to the city where people never die before the angel of death can get them. And just as they're at the entrance, they die. The next day, King Solomon sees the angel of death and he's looking pretty happy again. And he says, well, why are you so happy? And he says, well, you know those two guys? The place that they were supposed to die was actually the entrance to the city of Luz. I had no idea how I would ever get them there. And sure enough, there they were right on time. But the point of it is that people of this nature can elevate to the point where they supersede the sin of Adam. And the sin of Adam, according to us, was not the eating of the fruit. To eat the fruit, to make a mistake, is human. We are part angel, we are part animal. God does not expect us to be angels, and God does expect us not to be animals. But as a human being, we will err, and the beauty of the human being is to learn from the error and to overcome that and to become a better person. So the eating of the fruit was not the sin. What was the sin was the arrogance of refusing to accept responsibility for having sinned, and worse, trying to pass the buck. Adam tries to pass it to Eve, Eve tries to pass it to the snake, and that's the end of the story. So when you come to people like Moses and you come to people like King Solomon, who have become so humble and so great at the same time, then the need for death, which is the ultimate cure of this arrogance of denial of responsibility, suddenly it no longer has a fate. And this is why we're told that holy people are alive even after they die. Just because a person sheds their body doesn't mean they're dead. Just because you get out of a boat when you go across the river doesn't mean you're dead. The vessel has served its purpose. So a person who has gone inside of this vessel and found the divine image of God that lives within them, has connected to that to bring life and wisdom and light into the world. Such a being will only become a greater light once they are no longer trapped by an opaque form. And conversely, people who are so completely lost into this world, and they're so consumed by the physical possessions and pleasures of this world, all of which have a proper place, but they're consumed by these things, such a person is dead even while their body is still functioning. So as to this level, this is what's called the concept of the evil inclination, the second of the three names of the devil. We are told that at a certain point in time, the great court in Jerusalem decided that the Jewish people were no longer able to stand up against this evil inclination, specifically in their desire to worship idols. And so the court convened, and through this power, they actually killed the evil inclination for idolatry. And they thought, hey, as long as we're on a roll, why don't we also get rid of the evil inclination, excuse me, the evil inclination for immoral behavior. And so what interestingly enough is, as they began to do their prayers, the evil inclination came out as a fire lion, a lion made out of pure fire that jumped out of the temple of Jerusalem. It didn't come out of 42nd Street and Broadway. It came out of the very holy of holies of the temple as a lion of fire. And when they captured this lion, they found that after a day of having it in captivity, there wasn't a single fresh egg laid in all of the land of Eretz Israel. So they realized is that this drive, this desire, this inclination is really not innately evil. It is the very power of creativity and is the power of creation. It's only when it becomes distorted or becomes misused that it becomes negative. But the very power and essence in of self is innately good. This is symbolized on a deeper level because it says that when the snake was originally created, the snake was created not bad, but rather erect like a human being to be the servant to humans. And only after the downfall did the snake become something which slithers. And we find this referred to later, that when Moses approaches Pharaoh and his advisors, Moses turns his staff, which represents the snake in the pre-sin of the Garden of Eden. But when he throws it to the ground, it becomes a snake. And when they threw their staffs down, they became snakes. And if you read the verses in the Torah carefully, you'll see it's not that Moses' snake ate their snakes. It's rather that Moses' staff ate their staffs. Because once the snake returned to the hand of the holy man, it becomes a tool, it's a vessel through which to be able to use good. It's only out of the hand of the holy man does such a vessel become something which is negative and destructive. But now back to the idea of the devil. And to understand his light, we have to understand a couple of things about the word devil. In the Hebrew and Talmudic terminology, the term is called Satan or Satan. Satan actually, or technically, means to the resistor or the opposition. He's somebody who comes to, you could almost call him the plaintiff. He's the one that is bringing the decree against something. We're going to drill down on this in a minute, but as a quick side, Tosfos points out that if you take the numerology or the numerical value of the word Satan in Hebrew, it comes out to 364, which is suggesting that in fact there is one day in the year that the Satan has no power. And Tosfos tells us that that particular day is the day of Yom Kippur, the Holy of Holies, the day of complete atonement. Now, in a way, what this really is coming to teach us is that by the purpose of the devil is that the devil or the Satan is a really very high and holy angel. And his function or his approach to this world comes through the approach of divine justice. And what's happening is because of his incredible love of God, what he's actually doing is fighting for the jealousy of God. When he sees that something is going against the will of God, this is unacceptable to him. So rather than another angel who may still be filled with mercy and compassion and understanding and trying to analyze or give the benefit of the doubt as to why such behavior occurs, this angel, on behalf of God and behalf of justice, says there's something wrong here. In other words, the devil in Judaism can never create a fictitious case. There's, like, in hell, there's nobody in hell yelling out, I want to see my lawyer. There's nobody in hell yelling out, my gosh, this is a bum rap. Because everything is just. So when the Satan is accusing a person, they're really accusing a person on a just level. The only thing is that we can't live on that level. So Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us that power of mercy and rachamim and kindness and chesed in order that we should have this ability to come back to be in the just way that we should be. It's almost like if you remember in Roadrunner, there'd be times like when Roadrunner would run off the cliff and he'd be off the cliff and he would suddenly, whoa, but instead of dropping, he would come back on the cliff. When you're on the ground, this is justice because this is the way it's made. You're able to stand on the ground. But when you're in the air and you're still standing, this is complete kindness from God. God gives us this space in order for us to come back, to return to the ground, to do tshuva, to be able to be who we really are. So therefore, the reason that the Satan has no power, so to speak, or he has a day off on Yom Kippur, is because on Yom Kippur, we're doing his job. That's the day when we become critical of ourselves. That's the day when we ask ourselves, what are we really doing with our lives? Not what are we projecting into the world, not what are we hoping other people will think of us, but what are we really? How do we talk to our loved ones? How do we relate to people in business? Are we honest? How do we give our charity? How do we do the things that we do? Do we really do them on a deep inner level of connecting with our divine spirit? And I don't think I could say yes. If you could, all the power to you. But since none of us probably could, therefore every year comes that Yom Kippur opportunity to be able to criticize ourselves, but through the criticism to rebuild ourselves. And in fact, this is really the job of the Satan, of the Yetzer Hara. The Baal Shem Tov says that the beauty of what we learn from our evil inclination is that it comes as a bitter criticism to us. Because the fact that we could succumb or we could even be tempted by these things shows us weaknesses in our armor, in our spiritual armor. And therefore, all the Yetzer Hara is doing is by pushing our buttons or attracting us to things that really veer us off from where we are, it's showing us where we need to strengthen ourselves. In fact, the idea of the Yetzer Hara or the Satan is really like a sparring partner. The function of the sparring partner is not to beat the fighter. The function of the sparring partner is to make the fighter the best he could possibly be by giving him a complete run for his money. But could you imagine if he knocks out the fighter? That wouldn't be his job. In fact, our sages tell us that when the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, causes a person to sin, he cries. That's not his job. When he challenges a person to do evil, and then the person overcomes and resists, then it says that the devil rejoices, because his function is actually to see you do well. The devil's purpose in this world is to guarantee you a place in heaven. In fact, according to the Kabbalists, they say when you come up to the next world after 120 years, you go over to this little computer and they put in your DNA, and all of a sudden there comes a printout of all the wonderful things that you did in your life. And just as you're about to go marching off into heaven with your tudah, with your diploma, they say, no, sorry, you have to first go over there to the devil's office and show him this tudah. And what happens is you come in there with this diploma, and the devil calls up on his computer. He says, yeah, that particular good deed that you do. And he writes next, how many cubic pounds of resistance did he do to try to stop you to do that? According to how much effort he exuded to prevent your success, and you succeeded, that is the weight of gold of your heaven. So the ticket to your heaven is actually in the amount of the resistance that you had to overcome. And in learning those things, maybe, sometimes you have a personality, maybe a guy's normally a charitable person. So for such a person to give a charity, although it's a wonderful commandment, it's not that big a deal for him. But maybe for this guy, not to speak Lashon Hara, not to speak bad about other people, that's really tough. So therefore, for him to be able to overcome that, that's a real tremendous event, because there was the real resistance. And precisely because of the resistance, that was the way of indicating to him his particular job in this life of what it is that he needs to overcome. The ultimate myth of all ultimate myth is actually death. When Adam and Eve were created, there was not supposed to be any death in the world. Because if Adam had not succumbed, then Adam himself would have turned into the Messiah, and the whole creation of the world would have been fulfilled within those 7 days, as opposed to the 7,000 year period which we are now extrapolating. So therefore, this whole idea of death is really a myth, because really, even as far as Jews are concerned, nobody dies forever. The idea of the resurrection of the dead is one of our principles, of our fundamental tenets of belief, that everybody comes back to life. What will happen when you come back, that depends on what happens on what you do now. But nobody stays dead. Maybe a few exceptional individuals who really worked hard to screw up their lives, maybe they don't come back. But for the majority of us, there's resurrection of the dead. So therefore, what does it actually mean that he's the angel of death? And even further, what we say 3 times in our prayer, it's God who kills. It's God who takes life. It's God who gives life. Life and death, these are in the hands of God. So what does this mean, that the devil is the angel of death? Death is really a myth. So it means that the angel is only portraying the myth of this death to those of us that haven't been able to see that even death is merely a transition to another world to be closer to God. And the veil of death is put in front of us to make us appreciate how sacred our lives are. Okay, so let's get back to hell. Actually, from our perspective, hell is really a higher place than even earth. You know, a lot of times people will give you the image that there's kind of like earth, and above earth is heaven, and below earth is hell, and somehow, like, you know, hell is grabbing your feet and trying to pull you down, and heaven is grabbing your mind and trying to put you up. But from our perspective, actually, earth is the worst place to possibly be. And I'll explain to you why. From our perspective, the question really is, who is successful and who is a failure in life? So success and failure in the eyes of God has nothing to do with the amount of money that you put into your bank account, even though all of us spend so much of our time trying to put more and more money into our bank account. For what? But that's what we focus on. But unfortunately, if you're a rich man, it does not mean you're a success. And if you're a poor man, it doesn't mean, God forbid, you are a failure. Not at all. The definition of the highs and lows in the meaning of life is about the amount of wisdom that you acquire. When a person first acquires wisdom, that acquisition gives them everything. As our sages say, that a person who's acquired wisdom has acquired everything. But a person who has not acquired wisdom, no matter what they have acquired, has actually acquired nothing. So in that idea, earth becomes the one place in the world where you could live without ever knowing that there's God. And so therefore, by living in a world where there's a saying or experience of there is no God, this becomes the greatest in poverty. Because in hell, a person has no doubt that there's God. In hell, a person sees clearly that there's God. In fact, in hell, a person sees that everything that happens to them is completely just, and not just just, deserved. It's what they chose. This is why we say that in hell there are two types of hell. There's a hell of fire, and there's a hell of cold, because these two ideas of hell are really designed in order to be able to rectify the soul. Hell is not a permanent position. Hell is only a situation in which a person goes through in order to rectify themselves if they were unable to rectify themselves in this world. When a tortured soul comes into hell, if that soul was a soul that was always a needy person, somebody that could never be satisfied, somebody perpetually looking for more and more and more, and nothing could ever bring them to a state of peace of mind, that type of a person comes into a hell of ice, of that which is cold, because the ice controls that inability of the person to be able to stop moving. And conversely, if a person wasted their life as a potato couch, or somebody who never was able to get up and to do something, there was no movement in their life, then to such a person they go through a hell of fire, because this is the fire of the passion that they should have had in this world, but they didn't. So now they're able to experience the fire and the passion to rejuvenate themselves. But either way, through either one of these aspects of hell, the process of going through hell is simply a process in order to allow them to find that inner balance. Because on the other side of hell is heaven. And heaven is all about peace. And no soul can come back to its holy and pure source until it has been completely cleaned. So this idea of options of how the soul cleans itself, the best, of course, is while you are alive, and a person can do this at any moment in their life with 1 second, to have a real heartfelt sense of tshuva, of coming back to being who we are. And if not, then whatever we leave undone is still going to be rectified in hell. And if not, there's a worse situation, which is reincarnation. But we're not going to go into that tonight. But the idea of reincarnation being the worst as it is because through reincarnation, a person could slip even lower on their return to earth than they had been previously. So therefore, this is something which really, the Kutzker Rebbe always said, if you go up to after your 120 years and they ask you, would you like hell or reincarnation, pray for hell. Because reincarnation is really a horrible situation which could really become a bad thing to be. Tish B'Av, this is a time of hell on earth. But in a way, it's really a sense of becoming sober. It's a time in which we see that all of those things which the Torah tells us will happen, happen. It's a time when we realize, when a parent says, don't do this or I'll hit you, don't do this or I'll hit you, don't do this and I'll hit you, it's only when the child suddenly gets hit. As unfortunate as that is and how difficult that is for the parent, it's the moment when the child becomes sober. When the child realizes, or we all realize, that life is not a dress rehearsal. Life is for real. This is it. And what we do with this that's all completely up to ourselves. And so therefore, the Tish B'Av and the 3 weeks that lead up to this Tish B'Av, the 9th of Av, is really a time of reflection to stop and get away from all the noise and to come back to the inner voice, to understand and to listen. What are we doing? Where are we going? And what does our life have to offer us? That's why in Hebrew, if you look at the way the Hebrew letter Tet, which is the number 9, is written, it's almost a circle, but the very top has a puncture. It's as if it's suggesting that there's one little piece which is missing, that if you plug that piece, it would become a complete circle, which, as we know, the number 10 always represents in Judaism completion. So therefore, there's that little piece which is missing. And what is that little piece that's missing? It's us. It's each one of us. By becoming each of us the piece of the puzzle that we were created to be, not to be what other people want us to be, but to be what God created us to be a unique individual and at the same time an integral part of our community, to balance that relation of being a society member and yet understanding our uniqueness in the world. That can find who we are. We complete the 9 into the 10. And this is the idea of why Tish B'Av ultimately will become the greatest of all of the holidays. It will become a day of great joy rather than a day of great suffering. It will be the day when there will be a third temple in Jerusalem. Not a temple of Jewish sovereignty, but a temple where all the people in the world will actually be able to come together and pray together as one with God. It's interesting, by the way, in the newspaper today, it actually mentioned 30% of the people living in Israel are ready to rebuild the third temple. But we'll leave that aside for right now. Anyhow, the last point I just want to make is as follows. That which we reflect upon during these 3 weeks, culminating in Tish B'Av, that sobriety and waking up and understanding what it is that we have become, prepare us for another 3-week period, which is the time from the Jewish New Year of Rosh Hashanah to the end of Sukkot, which is called Simchat Torah. Those are the 3 weeks in which we now accept upon ourselves through our choice how we want to go into our future. We reflect upon our mistakes in these 3 weeks to see what we have done, and now to go forward, we choose what we wish to be our future. Educators say that there are actually 2 ways to teach a child a lesson. One is through wisdom, and the other is through experience. One is to tell the child that the pot is hot, and if the child listens, then he's good. And if he doesn't listen, then he gets burnt. But either way, the lesson gets through. And so therefore, in a way, this is our free will. God's lesson is definitely going to come through. Our only choice is, are we going to do it in a state of joy? Are we going to do it by showing that we fulfilled the reason we were created and put in this world in order to be able to choose that goodness, which is Rosh Hashanah to Simchat Torah? Or God forbid, even if we fail, are we going to fail in the way where the message will still come through, but the message comes through in a way where we have the destructive nature of 3 weeks? The Gemara Baba Metzia tells us that Jerusalem was only destroyed because the Jews stood upon the letter of the law. They were observant Jews. They were not non-religious. They kept the law, but they kept the letter of the law. They had no compassion for each other. They had no ability to go beyond what the letter of the law was. As the Maharal says in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, he says that when a rabbi or a scholar stands upon the letter of the law, all he does is increase argument in the world. But when a person stands upon charity, as the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot in the 2nd chapter, then he increases peace. And therefore, it's this ability of ours to create peace between each other by being compassionate, by going beyond the letter of the law, by giving other people the benefit of the doubt, by rather than pointing other people and making them our excuses and blaming them for why they're all the bad in the world, turning around and looking into what part do I play in that? What can I fix up about what's going on? And by finding that in myself, what I need to do to rectify, and finding in the other person what there is to love about that person. As Reb Shlomo Carlebach said, if the world was once destroyed, the temple was brought down because of random hatred, the only rectification is random love. And therefore, if we can create that kind of a level, we create that kind of a peace. Peace is what heaven is all about. And through that level of peace, this is the level of peace that Moses and Solomon reached with the angel of death. There's no more need for death. There's no more need for war. There's no more need for destruction. If we can create that peace among ourselves, and we can do it, but it starts with each one of us. But if we do it, then we are able to bring heaven to earth. And this is our choice and our free will.